Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Ted Gardner, and I'm an interviewer for the Library of Congress Oral History Project, which is so ably conducted here at our wonderful public library of Cincinnati. And I have the honor of interviewing a dear friend, a new friend, who I just have been lucky to discover in the last couple of years. His name is Bill Barr, and he lives on the west side of town. Bill's a remarkable man in his own right. And we're having our capable Dennis Daly on the videograph here, and we're going to talk about Bill Barr and his life. And Bill, where were you born?
Aurora, Illinois.
Oh boy.
April 1,
And April,
1923.
April Fool's baby, huh? And didn't you say that was Easter Day?
Yeah, it was Easter Sunday. And hasn't happened but twice since
Isn't that something?
in all the years.
Right, right.
Easter falls on April 1.
Right. What was your family like? Did you have siblings?
Brother and a sister.
Oh, did you?
And they're both alive right now. My sister lives in Arizona, and my brother lives in Paris, France. He's retired from the State Department.
Oh gosh, so he's an
He
expatriate.
had a career in diplomacy.
Isn't that wonderful? What a great family. Well, where did you went to elementary school there in Aurora?
Yes, Greenman School, and that's 8 years. Then I went to West Aurora High School for 4 years, and
Then off to
went
college.
to Cornell University on a scholarship.
Cornell.
Mhm.
Wow. And that was what?
19
Engineering?
1941 it was our graduation class in June from high school.
Yes.
So we walked right into the war.
Sure.
The bombs dropped in Pearl Harbor while I was a freshman at Cornell.
Yes. Well, I was a junior in college on the 7th of December, 41. So you were right at that great University of Cornell, high above Cayuga's waters, of course.
That's right.
Engineering was your
Mechanical
study?
engineering.
Mechanical engineering. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Well, the interesting thing, of course, and what everyone wants to know, and of course your family is going to have a DVD, of this interview, so you'll be able to show it to them, and I'm sure they're going to be very pleased with that. As the war came on, and you were a freshman in college, what was your first impression after Pearl Harbor Day?
In the campus in Ithaca, everybody went bananas.
Yes.
They got fire hoses out and they paraded up and down the streets. And
Really?
all it halfway between hysteria and jubilation. I don't know how you can call it that because it's a tragedy, but
Patriotism?
I think so. It was a welling up of unity that became characteristic of our whole country during the war.
Yes.
We've had our problems in Korea, in Vietnam, and wars since, with divisions of opinion in the general population. But that was not true in World War II.
Absolutely.
The bombing of Pearl Harbor provoked so dramatically a sense of unity and common purpose that we didn't have two views. The Republicans, the minority, had Vandenberg and other such leaders as that who were loyal opposition, is what it was called.
Yes.
And they were given a little bit of expression and so forth, but Franklin Roosevelt and his White House staff ran that war.
But it was done in a fairly civil way, too, interrelationships between personalities, more so than what we're seeing today.
A huge contrast with today.
Yeah, right.
We don't see anything like the harmony and unity that brought us forward as a nation in great trouble. We had to fight two wars at the same time.
Yes, we did.
We had a Pacific War and we had a war in Europe. As a matter of fact, in one of the books that I've written has to do with the chronological history of World War II. It's amazing to find the number of theaters.
Yes.
It wasn't just 2 wars either. The number of fronts and active combat going on in 9, 10, or 11 different theaters was not unusual.
That's right. When you progressed on that year and into 1942, what were you looking ahead to as far as military service?
Well, I was, Cornell is an ROTC university, and we had...
It's a land-grant college too, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
And so we had, ROTC was artillery, but it was coast artillery.
Aha.
And that did not catch my imagination because I had a lot of experience at that time in aviation,
Yes.
indirectly.
Right.
In that, as I grew up, I always idolized Charles Lindbergh and thought to myself, I'd like to be like him someday. And so aviation appealed to me, Eddie Rickenbacker and Jimmy Doolittle, and many of these great pioneers of those days were, and Admiral Byrd. They caught my fancy, and
Right.
I said to myself, that's the direction that I'd like to go. So eventually I signed up for V5, it was called. And that's aviation training, naval aviation.
Right.
And they have 2 main bases for graduation, and that's Corpus Christi, Texas, and Pensacola, Florida.
Right.
After 17 months of going through training at about 6 or 7 different bases, I've got my wings at Pensacola, and our whole class, our battalion we called it, was put into multi-engine, somewhat to my disappointment.
You wanted to be a fighter
I
pilot.
visualized myself as a captain of a plane and soaring into the sky and chasing the enemy.
Right.
And it wasn't to be. Because when you're in multi-engine, it's either bomber or, as it turned out for us, seaplanes.
Yes.
And that was PBY, PBM duty, which is much different than the duty that I visualized.
What was it like flying those multi-engine planes?
Well, you have a crew, and in 2-engine planes, it's ordinarily a pilot and a co-pilot, and it's not a stick that you're used to in training, but with the pedals, but rather it's a yoke a frame that goes across, and there's a wheel here and a wheel here, and each one of us has virtually a steering wheel which you can pull back and forth on. So you can get your dimensions that way, but it's certainly disappointing when, in your first experience in a PBY, you turn the wheel over and you wait and you wait for the response. Finally, the wing decides it's going to lift a little bit, and then you can make a turn. The response couldn't be more sluggish than the high response that you get in the fighter plane.
Yes, exactly. And coordinating with your co-pilot, you had to have a person, this was real teamwork.
Well, we had 11 in the crew on a PBM.
Wow.
And there are 2 co-pilots. I was one, and Frank Morgan of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin was my other. We graduated together. And in the Navy, please understand that the emphasis placed on navigation cannot be overstated.
Oh, I'll say.
First of all, the Navy is run by sea captains.
Right.
And it goes all the way back to Columbus and Galileo, and those people that figured out that they could navigate by the stars.
Right.
And so navigation was emphasized to the order of 2 hours a day for every day we ever had ground school or flight school and so forth, all the way through.
Celestial navigation with
All of
the
that.
sextant and everything.
All of that.
Yeah.
And well, it came in perfectly because as we served as, you might say, recon. This is short for reconnaissance or reconnoiter. And the admiral is depending upon the plane that goes on search and locates the enemy. And the first thing they want to know is, what are you seeing? What is the strength of the enemy? Evaluate the strength.
Right.
Then evaluate the direction they're going and the speed they're going so that they can anticipate where they're going to end up.
Right.
But the accuracy of all of that is worthless if you can't give them the right location where you are when you're talking to them.
I know.
So,
and those
and
coordinates.
that happened in the war. There were some very serious mislocations
Oh, yes. Great
due
help.
to inaccuracies of fix as to where you were at the time that you're giving your report.
And losses not only of planes, but of ships.
Tragedy
Ships at sea.
So it's key. It's very key.
Very key.
So that meant that the two co-pilots each one was the navigator or the co-pilot. We're interchangeable.
How about
And
that?
on Monday, we're one doing one thing, the other, on Tuesday, we've changed and the other one's doing it.
Sure.
But it's, navigation was vital.
Right.
So that would be true in, not only in recon work, but also in patrol and in convoy work, anti-sub work. Eventually, we had to win the war over the German submarines in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. That had to be as a prerequisite for our being able to start a second front in Europe. You can visualize how the pressure that Stalin was putting on Roosevelt and Churchill every time they got together and at every opportunity as to they're killing my soldiers millions at a time.
Yes.
When are you going to start your second front?
Exactly.
And that's not an exaggeration.
Oh, no.
And the end of a war, 20 million Russian soldiers were killed, but only 775,000 British soldiers.
Right. Just imagine.
I mean, we're talking about the order of 30 or 40 to 1 there.
Yes. Yes.
So for us to get the second front happening, we had Operation Torch in North Africa, and then eventually the landing in Normandy. But that prerequisite had to be, we had to subdue the German submarines, and they were under Dornier, and he was a wily guy, and they had in the order of 300 or 400 submarines operating simultaneously in the North and South Atlantic and in the Mediterranean.
Wasn't it amazing how eventually, after great losses in the Atlantic, with our transports and so forth, trying to get personnel and materiel to Europe, finally figured out the plan that absolutely defeated the German Untersee boats and knocked them out of the war.
It had a lot to do with cooperation and science and technology.
Right.
And war production.
And cryptology.
All of those, intelligence was a vital factor, but the nemesis of the U-boat, as it turned out, was our ability to fly overhead and observe. Once they're spotted, they're dead.
That's it.
Because the communications that we had, the sonar, the radar, and the intercommunications were effective when planes would fly over, some of them from shore, some of them because they're seaplanes from the water, and others from baby flat tops, Jeep flat tops, or Kaiser coffins, take your pick. But they were converted merchant ships, turned into small carriers, and that makes a lot of sense because they're traveling right along with the convoy, and they're sending up the planes and flying over the very spot that they're protecting, and it worked.
Right.
And eventually the attrition rate fell in March, April, May, and June of 1943.
Yes.
When at that point the attrition rate for submarines rose to 90%.
Just imagine.
And when the German U-boat commanders, who were very brazen and outspoken, daring kind of people, early in the war, they became very cautious,
Yes.
knowing that this was their last trip
Right.
out.
And a submarine, it can't run. It really can't run away.
No,
And of course,
once they're spotted.
almost like sitting ducks.
Uh-huh.
Well, your flying, tell us about your flying experience, the areas that you were in, and what you saw.
Well, maybe you've heard of the Bermuda Triangle.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Infamous.
whether it's a myth or not,
Right.
I'm not here to say. We flew out into it constantly and didn't seem to experience anything unusual. Anyway, we flew after graduating from Pensacola and getting operational training in PBYs at Bronson. We went finally to Banana River. This is Cape Canaveral now, the very place where our space flights take place. Visualize, if you will, Texas crude coming out of Houston. It has to get to an eastern seaport for refining. And that gasoline is vital for trucks, planes, tanks, industry, ships. The lack of oil in the war is the end of the war.
Yes.
We tried to bomb their oil facilities at Pulaski and other places for that very same reason. They wanted to stop our Texas oil from getting up the coast.
Yeah.
And Banana River was set there so that coming around Key West and up the Gulf Stream and up to the Atlantic frontier was vital, that the oil had to get through.
Yes.
And the planes that were set to do it were PBMs.
How about that? Now, the PBM was called the Mariner
Yes.
and was built by
Martin.
Martin, and that's the designation M for
Glenn L. Martin.
Yes, right. Isn't that? Well, and the PBM was a 4-engine plane.
No, two.
Two.
Two-engine plane.
Catalina and the
Right. The idea, the construction and the concept was that it didn't have to be a fast plane, but it had to be a plane that could stay up in the air for a long period of time. We stayed in the air for 30 hours at a time.
Really?
Yeah. Wow. And so we had long-legged patrols that took us out to Bermuda, to San Salvador, to San Juan, to St. Thomas, to Guantanamo, to Roosevelt Roads, to Curacao, to Trinidad, to Cologne, to Key West, all those places.
Isn't that something?
And-
Crisscrossing the Caribbean.
Well, every one of us, every one of those had a purpose. It was to cover an area or to cover a convoy. And convoys were scheduled. Convoys were all planned and executed according to the protection that was required.
Right.
And the assembly of all the ships and the ship captains and so forth had to be coordinated. And when uncoordinated, they became pretty impregnable. But before, early in the war, it was a disaster.
Right.
The losses were just terrible.
Terrible.
We had a convoy going from Britain to Murmansk. And this is the token support that we could give Russia in the early days of the war. And we would lose on the order of 33 ships, 22 would be sunk, and 11 would reach Murmansk.
Just imagine, yeah. And
That
of course,
was
the infamous
oh.
PQ-17,
Yeah.
which was the
That's
most
the one.
tragic of all.
Right.
Yes. Did in your experience of watching and guarding and constantly on on patrol and having to be alert for up to 30 hours at a stretch. Did you ever spot a German submarine?
The answer is no.
No.
But it isn't a constant search in that they're not very effective unless it's daylight.
Right. Oh, that's true. Yeah.
And so we had bunks, and we would fly to a new position for dawn and go about our business throughout the daylight hours.
Did you ever fly a Mars, the big one?
No.
Yeah.
No, never flew anything except PBYs and PBMs in combat, but in training flew 5 or 6 different kinds of planes.
Right. How did you like the Catalina?
Well, sluggish. It was a 1934-35 vintage plane, you
Very
understand.
old, very old design.
And there was a time when Juan Trippi and others visualized air transportation, international air transportation, with flying boats.
Right.
And the China Clipper and the Pan Am Clipper and some of the other early commercial planes were all flying boats. And many of the locations where they would go for refueling and resupply and so maintenance and so forth were legs of a long trip across the Pacific, such as Hawaii, coming from California to Hawaii, to Midway, to Guam, to the Philippines, Hong Kong.
Right.
5 or 6 legs to a trip that might take a week, and it was considered a miracle at the time.
Yes.
But each one of those planes had to land on water.
Well, you and I can both remember in the early
They
30s.
couldn't wait for the airports to be built.
Oh, yeah. But you're speaking of those great planes, and you and I both as boys in the 30s, and the romance and the excitement of reading about the China Clipper and the Hawaii Clipper and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
And their great exploits across the Pacific.
Well, I think they took brave passengers. they had to be adventurers, most of them.
That's right.
They're like pioneers.
Sure, absolutely. Well, this is absolutely fascinating and something that so few people really know about, Bill. What you did, the big headlines of Normandy landings and recapturing the Philippines and all that sort of thing captured the imagination. And there again, that's something about World War II was the security of information. Tell us a little bit about that.
We had navigational devices like LORAN, not known to many, but twin sending towers were erected throughout the globe. Slave and master they were called, but they're pairs, and they would send continuous signals, and you can tune in on those and establish a line of position using LORAN. It was rather like radar in the sense that it had an oscilloscope and you could switch channels and so forth. But a wonderful device for a navigator.
Right.
And we were uncomfortable in the Pacific unless we had our LORAN was working.
I'm sure.
We heard about the end of the war, Ted, when we were over in the Atlantic near the island of San Salvador, which is where Columbus made his landfall. And we heard over the air that Germany surrendered.
How about that?
And of course that was a wonderful thing to hear.
Oh, I should say.
Within about 10 days after that, we had orders to go to Alameda, to Kaneohe, and it took a while for everybody to reassemble as our crew, but we found ourselves assigned to a tender in Kaneohe, and we took off, and our duties at that point were entirely different than it had been in anti-sub patrol and recon in the Atlantic.
Now, when you speak of a tender, you're talking about a large ship that is heavily supplied with all kinds of things.
Yeah, it has our fuel and our supplies, our food, everything that we need to operate, and the mechanics aboard that can get the job done, all trained for that purpose.
Sure.
And the tenders can move from Site A to Site B according to the orders that are given. But we can take off when the tender is here and go on our mission for 30 hours and come back. The tender's someplace else.
Sure.
And so that's another thing about the seriousness and the importance of navigation when you have relative positions of the ship and the plane.
Right.
It's moving, we're moving. It's 3 hours later, it's 6 hours later, it's 10 hours later. Where is it and where are we? We have to get back.
What was, did you have any experiences with weather?
Yes, we've gone through fronts where we heard, where was I? Just on television yesterday, I think, this rough weather that they had around Chicago.
Yes.
A plane took off from Denver and thought it was ahead of that storm, but it went through the storm, and everybody on the plane thought they were going to die. But the struts on those planes are highly stressed and very well built.
Yes.
We found that ours was too.
Yes.
When we go through those flints, the ends of the wings are fluttering and everybody's bouncing around inside.
Right.
And we make sure that everything's tied down. And it's rough going through fronts.
Yes, I should say. Did you ever encounter a typhoon in the Pacific?
No, we never got that close, and I wouldn't want to. I don't think we would have made it.
No.
And certain destroyers and destroyer escorts went down.
Oh, yes.
Even a cruiser, I think we lost a cruiser.
Halsey's typhoon in December of '44.
Right.
Terrible. Terrible.
We got there much later than that. It was after the Germans surrendered, and we found ourselves going to outposts. You might say we were truck drivers, let's face it. We were going to places that were inaccessible for various reasons, like if somebody is dying of appendicitis and they have to get him out, and there's no way to get him out except by the air, by seaplane.
Right.
Or delivering orders, or even, it was called a milk run.
Yes.
You
But
know,
it was so vital.
A bush pilot would call it a milk run.
Sure.
So we were delivering the needs of places that were remote,
Yes.
and in and out, and then getting back to the tender.
Of course, and so vital to the whole concept of the operations in that area. Well, now you're getting down to the end of the war, and you learned about Germany's surrender. That was in June.
We were coming down from the Aleutians when we heard the good news when we were in the air.
Oh, you'd been up to the Aleutians too.
August 2.
Wow.
Uh-huh.
Wow. Yeah. And then, of course, in August you heard about the two big bombs over Japan.
Some of the most uninformed people in the world were the people who were in it.
Yes, that's true. I know that too. Yeah.
You know, we
learn
didn't
about
have
things-
newspapers or anything like that.
Sure.
We didn't even have monthly magazines to read,
No.
and quite often.
Right.
And we would get news or information in snatches from the radio.
Yes. Yes.
You know, you can ride a radio beam, and that's one of the devices you have for getting a line of position. And so we tune in Honolulu, or we tune in Guam, and get some news that way. But we knew very little. I don't think we knew about the bombs until we read about it after coming back.
Did you ever hear anything from the enemy, like Tokyo Rose or anything like that?
No.
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 Well, this is so important, and this is what so few people today understand, that communications in those days, so different from now, where we have instant communication
right.
with every remote part of the world.
Yeah.
Sometimes, as you point out, it was 2 weeks, 3 weeks later when you finally found out what happened.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, Bill, The war was winding down. Were you looking ahead to have to go to Japan?
We would fight the war out to its final conclusion.
Yes.
In the Churchill and Roosevelt had signed that, gone on record that the unconditional surrender were the only terms. And yet we knew that the Japanese were fanatics and that the people, the Japanese people and the military and so forth were imbued with the idea that it's noble to die for the Narcissus or whatever their chrysanthemum was their symbol.
Right.
Or the rising sun.
Right.
So that all of the pilots kept pistols for suicide. When we invaded their islands, such as Guam and Tinian and
Saipan.
Anyway, in the Marianas, when we invaded, the natives would jump over the cliffs and commit suicide.
Yes.
They were so indoctrinated. And so we were ready to invade Japan,
Right.
and expected to.
Yes, yes. Finally, of course, the bombs negated that, and what a great, what an absolutely overwhelming problem it was for President Harry S. Truman to have to make that decision.
I think he made the right decision.
Absolutely.
Without question.
Absolutely.
And I don't listen very hard or with much tolerance to the people that argue the other way.
Absolutely. Yes, yes.
I think maybe we might have saved 1 million lives, American lives,
Yes.
Allied lives.
Right. Not to say how many Japanese lives were saved because they were dedicated to die for the emperor.
Well, just think that of what MacArthur accomplished in turning that country around to become a valuable ally.
Brilliant.
Economic ally.
Brilliant.
Non-military country.
Yes.
A fantastic conversion of a mortal enemy turned into an asset.
Right.
In a matter of, I imagine it took about 5-6 years for them to get the message and to get him organized. But they're ingenious people.
Absolutely.
They have high technology and they're industrious.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the great accomplishments of 20th century was our ability to convert the Japanese to become, along the same lines that we followed with the Marshall Plan in Europe.
In Germany.
Let's face it.
Absolutely.
We did the same. We said we're not going to do what Versailles did.
Yes.
Set up a new set of enemies.
We learned a lesson from that.
Right.
We did indeed.
And it was easy to think of it both ways.
Mm-hmm.
You could be persuaded to say, let's make these people pay for what they've done.
Yes.
But wisdom prevailed. And I have to say that Roosevelt was dead, but Marshall was still alive, and others who were good counsel, and they persuaded essentially that the country to be tolerant of our enemies and to get them back on their economic feet.
Yes, exactly right.
And we did that.
Yes.
Now, I became associated with the gear industry again. I had been in it before I went into the college for. And then when I got out, I re-entered after my GI Bill, thanks to that education. So when I re-entered that industry, I found that the best cobbing machines and gear making machines were coming from Germany with brand new plants, with new machinery, in competition with us who had old machinery.
Right. And their rocket science and everything.
So it was easy to resent that.
Yes.
But as I look back on it and take a historian's view, it was the right thing to do.
Well, you are a historian, and you've done so much enlightenment for people today through your writing for the St. Croix Press and the books that you've written, you've now contributed several of those to our library here in our history department, which is one of the greatest in the country. And your illumination through this interview has just been tremendous, because people will see this, Bill. There's going to be a copy sent to the Library of Congress in Washington, a copy kept here, and of course your family and you will get the DVD. So you will be forever a source of information and important intelligence for people to plumb. And we thank you for that. You came back after the war. You got married after the war?
1947.
Okay.
The other day we enjoyed our 60th wedding anniversary.
Oh, congratulations.
On the 23rd of August.
Oh, that's just wonderful.
Less than a week ago.
I should say so. And how about your immediate family? Tell me about them.
Well, we have three of our own children, and tomorrow we'll be flying off to Wisconsin and end up in northern Wisconsin in 2 cabins side by side at a lake where we've gone many, many times before. So we'll have our family together.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And the grandkids too.
Sure. How many grandchildren?
7.
Terrific. Oh, that will be a glorious time for all of you. Well, that's great. What else, as you reflect, as our time begins to run out, your reflection over the years of your experience, and no matter what we did as individuals in the war, each one, no matter what it was, had a contribution, and yours has been so tremendous.
I entered the gear industry after I considered being a Shakespearean professor. I spent the summer at Stratford-on-Avon, going at University of Oxford branch in 1949 with a serious intention of being a college professor. This is all GI Bill college education. But when I got into that, I was disillusioned. And you might say that I don't have the same universal admiration for academia. Judged by my peers at the time, I went to the University of Minnesota for graduate work and found that a good number of my friends in that group were there because they didn't have confidence in themselves in the competitive world, and was looking for a sanctuary.
How about that?
And I drew a conclusion that was quite the opposite. I said, I'd like to jump into that competition.
Yes.
And so at a certain point, I abandoned my ideas of becoming a Shakespeare professor, and might say I set the groundwork for being able to write in those days, in that period of time. But that went into a cocoon and stayed there for 35 years.
How about that?
And then reemerged.
And here you were in Cincinnati, and you were with Cincinnati Steel Gear and Pinion.
Tool Steel Gear and Pinion.
Tool Steel Gear and Pinion.
Yeah, which has morphosized into X-Tech Incorporated.
Yes, right.
At any rate, the gear business was good to me, and I enjoyed it, and look back on it with quite an amount of pride and accomplishment.
Absolutely.
For instance, we have our Desert Storm, and then we have the existing war in Iraq now, and all of the military phase of that war was handled with great efficiency, in both wars.
Yes.
Desert Storm and Iraq. Because we have an island in the Indian Ocean which has all of the stores that are needed and harbor that we need, and it has all of the computer installations that are needed for managing and controlling the the sea, the air, and the land. And so the ships that came and went back from the Indian Ocean to the front in the Middle East were all lash ships. They were commandeered by the military. The lashes, there were 24 of them built in the series, lighter aboard ship. These have huge gantry cranes that go fore and aft on the ship, 500-ton cranes that lift the lighters off the water and place them in the hold of the ship.
Wow.
And they are exactly what was needed for Desert Storm and for this.
Right.
Bob Hope went there and gave some of his Christmas parties that he had there.
Diego Garcia, isn't it?
Yes,
yeah.
Diego Garcia. And so anyway, it's done us well as far as our being able to act like a world power in a location that's way over there.
Right, and now we're facing what the Navy has concluded or has decided, the so-called littoral aspect of warfare, which means along the coastline and so forth. What do you think about that?
Well, I mentioned the last ships, and that wouldn't be very meaningful without this explanation. This is the concept of the racks that are needed on the port and starboard side of the ship.
Oh, yes.
That, ships are not like this floor right here.
No.
Ships are this way.
Yep.
And they all go this way. They hog and they sag and they roll. And the way you build a ship is to make a flexible ship. Don't make a rigid ship.
Right.
You'd be sorry if you did.
That's right. It's got to give.
Right. So this was a traction system that permitted gantry cranes, huge gantry cranes, to operate efficiently on ships that move.
Uh-huh.
And I'm proud to say that I'm the inventor of that.
Oh my goodness
This is my
sakes.
patent.
Look at that. Isn't that amazing? That is so, well, congratulations.
So anyway, these last ships have 600 feet of hold space and 1,200 feet of rack.
Wow.
And these pinions that are on the cranes move the cranes this way, climbing back and forth on these racks. What's ingenious about these racks is that they are cut from a slab this like that, this long, with a torch that moves like this.
And that cuts the grooves in them.
And those form the one-pitch teeth.
Okay.
When it falls into two pieces, you use them both.
Uh-huh.
There are no chips, and there is no swarf. You've just produced, and so you put one on top of the other, and you've got a 3.5-inch thick slab, now 7, and you fix them in such a way that they tilt inward a little bit. And the engagement of a crown tooth pinion with these two canted inward faces of the teeth produce a contact pattern that produces two patterns, neither one of which is near an edge.
How about
You don't want that.
no edge?
So anyway, this is unique,
Yes, it is.
and it's serving us well in the Far East right now with those 24 ships.
Well, it's obviously ingenious, and I'm so impressed with that. And it's so good that you're able to explain this and let this be seen. You live here, you're in retirement now from X-Tech?
Yes, I retired in 1985.
Oh my
So
goodness sakes.
I've been retired for 17 years
You're
now.
just a young man when you retired.
And enjoying it,
Yes, I know you do.
because I've reverted back to being a writer.
Yes, I should say.
And after being in the technical profession for 35 years.
Yeah, right. And have you ever considered being an adjunct professor anywhere?
Yes, I made that offer to Mount St. Joseph
Uh-huh.
and was turned down.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Probably you're too conservative.
I don't know whether that's it, or whether I'm Protestant, or whether that was just exactly what
I understand.
the
Yeah.
problem was. But I made a venture in that direction, and would have enjoyed it. So at that time, word processing came out. I used my computer that way,
Yes.
and I have accumulated a library, rather like this.
How about that?
And now I'm pointing at these bookcases. I'm not pointing at this building. No, but in a room that's 14 by 14, there's from floor to ceiling, there are books in that around all four walls.
Oh my goodness.
And so I am processing the information that I have accumulated in my own library.
Yes, yes.
They come here also to augment that.
I'm sure you do, because this is a great repository and a great resource area. Well, with that sort of an accumulation of a library, and with the technical things that you've written, as well as the historical things, have you got plans for that to go somewhere, sometime?
More of the same, I think.
Okay.
I'm 84, in
Yeah.
good health.
Right.
I enjoy my camaraderie with my fellow veterans,
Yes.
as you know, by our breakfast group.
Our Hornet group.
And some of the books that I've written are in a potpourri of subjects.
Yes.
And I'm known for having opinions, and I like to express them. But I like to think things through,
Right.
and research, and come up with conclusions that I think are valid and convincing.
Well, it's obvious to those of us who know you, and those with whom you come in contact through your writing and through your exposition and so forth, that your views are invaluable, and your invention and the way that you write and so forth. We're just, we who know you feel a great enrichment in our lives. I know that I have, and I know that everyone in our group does too. And that group is kind of remarkable in itself.
Amen.
Being as informal as it is.
There's no peer pressure there,
None whatsoever.
which you might expect among egomaniacs and proud people and so forth. It's not there.
No, it isn't. It's a very comfortable thing.
Everybody's relaxed and happy that the war came out the way it did, and content that they've contributed.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of goodwill.
Yes.
among
I want Dennis to come out sometime and just sit in and kind of absorb what goes on there. It is a truly remarkable group.
Ted, I think one of the most remarkable things is that it's a wonderful meld of officers and enlisted men.
Exactly.
There's no distinction there whatsoever.
Nope.
And no reticence or holding back or fear of making a ridiculous statement that somebody's going to jump on you about. Everybody's quite relaxed and willing to speak up.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of camaraderie there, and there's no distinctions in rank.
No, absolutely not. And whether it's Merchant Marine or Navy or Army or Air Force or Coast Guard, whatever it might be, everyone has a contribution to make and has done that. I just, what are you writing now? Are you writing anything particular that we ought to know about?
Yes, I have serious fears of our educational system right now.
Oh, yes.
And I think that the best teachers in the world were the ones who responded to a calling.
Yes.
And I don't think that you're going to find very many who are good teachers who are stalwart union members. The idea of working for a paycheck and teaching children don't, in my view, is not compatible.
Right.
I think that a calling is what makes a teacher outstanding, and I think outstanding teachers
Yes.
are what make outstanding students.
And that's what has made us such a strong nation through our short history.
Yeah, even the Little Red Schoolhouse produced
Yes.
people like Eisenhower.
Yes. Yeah, and Thomas Alva Edison.
Right.
Oh, my goodness, you're absolutely right. And the teaching of handwriting.
Well, that's a good point. Excellent point. You see some outlandish script these days.
Oh, yes.
And you know how my daughter was in, what's the organization where business goes in and helps in an adjunct way? I'm not thinking of the word. Business improvement? No. Anyway, I did that for a year at a junior high school, at 7th grade level. And I got a terrible impression as to what handwriting was.
Yes.
When it used to be up or over the blackboards.
Oh, yes.
And the Palmer method.
Yes.
And all that. And
Yes.
I take some pride myself in legible writing.
Yes.
But it was imbued in everybody when I was a student.
Oh, yes. Oh, you remember those exercises, daily exercises in the
Palmer
4th, 5th
method.
grade?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness, yes. Well, I agree with you on that, and we're finding that there is a certain amount of education today in technology in which students are using computers and so forth, which is wonderful, but at the same time, they're not getting what you and I look at as the basics of education.
Vacuums are quick to fill.
Yes, that's right.
And if students are not taught what they ought to know, or we want them to know, it's beneficial for the country and for themselves, for self-realization.
Yes.
They can get caught up in some very crazy notions.
Indeed.
And a lot of wasted time and effort goes into putting up with it,
Yeah.
or dealing with it, or coping
Yes.
with it.
Yes, because something
It's wasted motion.
You
as far
can't.
as-
I know it. You can't ignore it. It's there.
Right.
That's one of the big problems. Well, your experience in the Navy, of course, had an indelible mark on you and your life and your family, and your contribution has been absolutely immeasurable. I find it, as I've said before, I find it a great honor to be a friend of yours, and I mean that
And you are.
sincerely, as you know. And we both have interactions and so forth, and you've expressed yourself so well here today, as you always do. For those of you who might know, with our Hornet group, once a month, Bill Barr presents us with a historical aspect of, or review of what it was like 65 years ago.
65 years ago, month by month,
Month by month.
day by day, month by month.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly right.
So each month I hand out a month,
Yep.
and the days, all the activity and fronts and so forth in that month, day by day.
Sure. And
So that as it goes together to perform, to make this, which is the completion of it.
yes.
And that's being donated now, today, with this second book about aviation.
That's the
Which
one
I hope will find interesting people, interesting readers.
oh, yes. Well, when you hand out that sheet at the breakfast every month, fellows will look at it and they'll say, oh, for gosh sakes, yes, now I remember. I'd forgotten all about that date in August of 1942, you know, and things like that. I wish we could, I wish we had a classroom of sponge heads that we could impart that to.
I think it's interesting that we started with a group of about 12 or 14, and in spite of the attrition, we're up around 40 now.
I know it. Our ranks
So
are
there are
growing.
more people showing up all the time.
I know it, and our ranks are growing, and in spite of the fact that Now World War II veterans are shuffling off at the rate of over 2,000 a day,
Yeah.
which people find very hard to understand. But you got to realize that, what were there, 16 million participating in World War II?
I think 12 million USA.
12 million
In
US.
the armed forces.
In the armed forces,
Yeah.
yes,
They
right.
can put together the merchant marine and,
Yes.
how about the Rosie the Riveters?
Oh.
I mean,
The war effort in this domestic area.
There were a lot of vital men kept out of the service.
Yes,
who-
because of their knowledge.
Who made the difference in the
Yes,
industry.
tremendous so. And their contributions are equally, or in some cases, more so than some of the fellows who have participated. We're coming along here toward the end of our, to me, it's just been a wonderful, wonderful experience to hear you express yourself. And I know that your contribution through your, not only your invention, but your scholarship and your academic approach in a very sensible way to what is needed in this country in the way of education. We thank you for that. It's been a great contribution. Bill,
Thank you, Ted.
again, God bless, and as we say, keep them flying.